climate issues have taken centre stage at the UN General Assembly. UN Chief Antonio Guterres warning that the world urgently needs a climate solidarity pact. He also says global financial systems are becoming increasingly fractured. Our correspondent in New York, William Denselow, joining us now. William, thanks so much for joining us. We've been covering what's being said and what's being done about these sustainable development goals that we are lagging very far behind on. And of course, climate and the challenges of climate change is one of those key goals. What's being said and what's being done about achieving our climate goals?
Well, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres really kicked off this Climate Ambition Summit. He essentially apologised for not being able to be there for more of it. He seemed somewhat irked by the fact that the UN Security Council was convening on the issue of Ukraine at a similar time and he was needed to be there. But before he left the summit, he said that the world had opened the gates of climate hell and urgent action was needed. He said that around us we can see parts of the globe burning. He said there have obviously been huge flooding in recent weeks, and he said that the world is way off track when it comes to some of the pledges already made, especially when it comes to financing, helping developing nations, when it comes to climate financing, getting technology transferred to help with preparedness. Decarbonisation, he said, were decades off track. The hope is this summit can help change some of that momentum. There are a few key threads to this Ambition Summit. Ambition, seeing what nations will do further in terms of pledges to the international community on this topic, credibility, as well as implementation targets that nations have already put in place to see things like decarbonisation. We also heard from South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa addressing this summit. He said that the African continent is warming faster than anywhere else in the world. Developed nations need to do more to help the developing countries when it comes to financing, to hit climate targets. So really urging greater action from the international community.
Yeah, and it's interesting, even from President Ramaphosa's speech last night, he addressed climate concerns, and I'm quoting here. He says it's great concern that these wealthier countries have failed to meet their undertakings to mobilize $100 billion a year for developing economies to take climate action. Has there been a response at this meeting to that accusation towards the wealthier countries?
There's been a real frustration. You're absolutely right that this $100 billion target was approved, was signed off on really in the past, and we're still not seeing that full implementation. So the hope is the summit that, yes, promises can be made, but what we need to see is that accountability, which is why this issue of accountability is one of the core tenets being discussed at UN headquarters, to ensure that countries not only make these promises to the international community, but go ahead and develop and deliver upon them. It's not just this climate summit where that issue of financing has been front and centre. It's really seen as a common thread throughout this high-level week, the issue of greater development for the Global South in particular. We've seen it for the two-day Sustainable Development Goals Summit, that urgent need for greater financing and how important it is to get a number of issues back on track. Of course, just 15% of the Sustainable Development Goals are currently on target. The hope is that through things like an annual $500 billion pledge to essentially help developing nations, especially with their SDG goals, this will all help try and break through some of the malaise we've seen at the UN. Debt restructuring is a huge part of it. The UN Secretary-General warning that the African continent is spending more on its debt, repaying its debt, than it is on healthcare. These are all urgent things that need to be addressed. The UN, their message, as it is so often, is that yes, lofty promises can be made here at UN headquarters in New York, but unless it's delivered upon, they're just words. It's not going to make the world a more prosperous place at a time where it's urgently needed, as the impacts of climate change are being increasingly felt.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's our correspondent in New York, William Denselow.